Dr. Judy Ho, and welcome to Mental Health Bites. In this podcast, we'll dive into a timely mental health topic, answer one of your burning questions, and leave you with a actionable, practical tip to improve your mental wellness every single day. So let's dive right in to the timely topic of the day. So, this is a challenge that I think everyone's faced at some point or another. How to talk with others through major differences, whether they're political divides, ideological disagreements, or just differing worldviews, and still preserve the relationship. It's no secret that we live in a time of heightened division. Whether it's politics, social issues, or even day to day matters, it feels like people are more polarized than ever. According to a 2021 study from the Pew Research Center, nearly 80% of Americans feel that the country is more divided than it was in the past. And this isn't just an American phenomenon. Similar trends are also seen globally. The divide often creeps into our most personal spaces, affecting relationships with friends, family members, and colleagues. And let's be honest, these conflicts can be emotionally exhausting. According to a recent survey by the American Psychological Association, around 68% of Americans say that they feel significant stress about the future of the nation due to these divides. And about half of the people surveyed admitted to losing friendships or distancing themselves from family members because of political or ideological differences. The emotional toll can be significant. It can make us feel anxious, frustrated, or even hopeless when we see our loved ones from such different perspectives. People sometimes will say, I don't feel like I know my husband anymore. I don't feel like I know my sister anymore. Who is this person? These family gatherings, holidays, or even simple social media interactions can all of a sudden feel like walking through a minefield. So, how do we navigate these situations without losing the people who matter the most to us? Today, we're going to explore this challenge in depth. We'll start by understanding the problem's scope, how these differences affect our relationships, and why they're so hard to navigate. And then I'm going to answer a listener question about dealing with these difficult conversations. And finally, we'll wrap up with some practical tips, particularly on how to practice active listening and how to set healthy boundaries so that these conversations can become more productive and less emotionally draining. To understand why political and ideological differences spark such intense reactions, we need to first recognize that these beliefs represent a lot of different things for people. They're not just casual opinions. They often form a core part of a person's identity and is a huge part of their value system. Political beliefs are frequently tied to deep seated ideals, moral convictions, and a sense of belonging to a particular group or community. When someone's values or core beliefs are challenged, it can really feel like a personal attack. Our brains are wired to respond to threats, both physical and psychological, in similar ways. Research from the University of Southern California found that when people read statements that contradict their deeply held beliefs, the brain regions associated with emotion regulation, like the amygdala, shows heightened activity. So, this means that neurologically, our bodies can respond to these situations as if they were genuine threats to our survival. Additionally, social psychologists have pointed out something that's called the identity protective cognition. This is a form of a bias where we instinctively defend our group's beliefs and reject opposing views, not necessarily because of facts, but because accepting different views might feel like betraying our group or admitting that we're wrong. This can trigger feelings of fear, anger, and even disgust. In a world where social media and news outlets amplify these divisions, it's no wonder we find ourselves more emotionally charged when engaging in these conversations. Now, let's talk about the impact these conflicts can have on families and friendships. Many of us have experienced it. Thanksgiving dinners turning into debates, friend groups splitting over different political beliefs, or even family members avoiding each other just to keep the peace. The impacts can be so significant that it leads to strained relationships over time, emotional distress whenever you think about having to interact with this person, and even permanent rifts and friendships ending over these differences. One of the primary ways these conflicts affect relationships is through emotional exhaustion. When we repeatedly clash with someone close to us, we can feel drained, frustrated, even hopeless. This emotional toll can create anxiety around future interactions, causing people to avoid each other or dread family gatherings. A study published in the Journal of Family Communication found that political and ideological differences were a major source of tension in family relationships, with many participants reporting a decreased desire to interact with their family members after contentious exchanges. This impact goes beyond just immediate discomfort. Constant arguing or the fear of another conflict can erode the foundation of trust and intimacy that close relationships are built on. In extreme cases, it can lead to estrangement. Research shows that nearly 1 in 5 Americans have stopped talking to a family member or a close friend because of political disagreements since 2016, according to the Public Religion Research Institute. Moreover, these rifts often go deeper than just that immediate conflict. Disagreements can resurface unresolved issues in the relationship or long standing tensions of other types. So, for example, a disagreement over a political issue might bring up past grievances or perceived slights, and that makes the situation even more complicated to navigate. Then, of course, there's a generational component. Differences in beliefs between parents and their adult children can feel very painful. Parents might see their children's differing views as a rejection of the values they try to instill, while the children may feel that their parents are not respecting their autonomy or their right to develop their own perspectives. A study by Stanford University found that generational divides in political views can significantly impact familial relationships, often resulting in feelings of alienation or disappointment on both sides. And let's not forget the role of social media. Online platforms tend to amplify conflicts. People often feel more emboldened to express their opinions without the filters they might use in a face to face interaction. That leads to misunderstandings and escalation because it's easy to misinterpret tone or intent in written communication. Social media algorithms also tend to show us content that reinforces our existing beliefs, and that makes it even harder to understand where the other side is coming from. This environment fosters an us versus them mentality, which, of course, is not conducive to helpful or constructive dialogue. In summary, these differences matter so much because they touch the deepest parts of who we are, and when they become sources of conflict, they can profoundly affect our closest relationships. But it's also important to remember that these disagreements, while they're challenging, are not insurmountable. The key is learning how to engage with each other in ways that build bridges, not walls. Let's move on to the Q&A section of the podcast. So today's question comes from Emily. Emily is from Chicago, and Emily says, I find myself clashing with my sibling over our different political beliefs, and it's starting to affect our relationships. We used to be so close, but now every conversation turns into a debate or worse, a full-blown argument. How can I keep our bond strong despite these differences? So, Emily, thank you so much for your question. I know that many of our listeners can relate to your situation. It's really tough when a close relationship starts to feel strained or even adversarial because of differing views. So, the first thing I want to say is you're not alone. A lot of people are experiencing similar challenges as you. A key starting point is recognizing that maintaining the relationship doesn't mean avoiding the topics completely or pretending that your differences don't exist. It's about finding a constructive way to engage with the differences and respecting the other person's views, even if you'll never agree with them. So, what can you do to keep your bond strong? Well, it starts with a mindset shift. Remember that the goal is not to win the conversation or to prove a point or to get them to come to your side. They may never do that. So, try to understand where they're coming from and why they hold these beliefs, because chances are they have a very good reason from their view of why their beliefs are so important. And so, just as these beliefs are so important to you and why you hold your views, they have a similar feeling about their views too. They're not just doing it to make you mad. So, just simply listening and trying to understand where they're coming from doesn't mean that you have to give up your convictions. It's just being open minded to another perspective that you may never adopt. But being able to demonstrate true open mindedness is going to mean a lot to your sibling. This approach can be disarming, it can help you to maintain mutual respect. And at the end of the day, You need to be able to wrap up difficult conversations and say, we can agree to disagree, give each other a hug, and move on because this is a person that's so important to you. This is a family member. And that relationship is so much more important than winning one argument or one conversation. Now let's move on to our practical tip of the day, which centers on two essential skills: active listening and setting boundaries. Let's start with active listening. Active listening is much more than just hearing the words someone is saying. It's about fully engaging with them to understand their perspective. Here are some specific steps you can follow to practice active listening effectively. And by the way, this is a secret therapist tool. Every single therapist I know has some version of this technique that they use with their clients and eventually teach to their clients so that their clients can use it in their personal life. But if you've ever been to professional therapy and you liked your therapist, think about how they validate and respond to you when you express a problem in your life. They're probably using some form of active listening, which is essentially showing non judgment, being able to reflect upon what you said so that you know that they heard you and they understood you, and then being able to help you reflect on your own views as well. So here are the steps to active listening. Step one, be fully present. So make sure you put away all distractions. Don't check your phone or glance at the TV while they're speaking. Really maintain full attention to them. Make eye contact and nod occasionally or show in some way that you're engaged. Your body language communicates a lot about your willingness to listen. Step two, reflect and paraphrase. After the person has spoken for a while, reflect back on what they said using your own words. For example, you could say, "So, what I heard you say was," and then fill that in with whatever you heard, but you can summarize it in the way that you see fit. This shows them that you're genuinely trying to understand their viewpoint, not just waiting for your turn to speak. Also, after that, you can invite them to clarify or to correct or to affirm. So you can say, "Is that about right?" Or "Is there something you'd like to add?" And that invitation is really helpful because if there was some misunderstanding, you can clear it up right away during this part of the dialogue. Or they can say, "Yeah, that was about right." Or they'll say, "Yes, that was right, but I want to add this other thing." And so it really helps to make sure that the misunderstanding is not occurring so early in the conversation. Step three, ask open ended questions. So encourage them to explain their viewpoint further. Instead of questions that can be answered with a yes or no, ask things like, "Well, can you tell me more about why you think that way or why you feel that way? Or what experiences have shaped your opinion on this?" Think of it as being ultimately very curious about what they're saying. So without trying to think about what you might say in response or, "Well, that's not right," try to adopt the viewpoint of a lifelong learner. Like, I wonder why you might think this way, and ask questions in that vein. This keeps the conversation open and allows for deeper understanding. Step four, validate their feelings. Even if you disagree with what they're saying, acknowledge the emotions behind their words. So you might just say, "I can see why you feel strongly about this," or "This sounds very important to you." Validation doesn't mean agreement. It just means recognizing that the other person's view is valid. Step five, be aware of nonverbal cues. Pay attention to both your body language and their body language, as well as tone and facial expressions. Sometimes what's not said is just as important as what is. So, for example, if you notice that they're crossing their arms or that their voice is getting tense, it might be a sign that they're feeling defensive or uncomfortable. So, the way to address that is not to interpret what that body language is saying, but just call it out and ask them how they're feeling, right? So, one example would be, "I notice that you're crossing your arms. Is it something that I said? How are you feeling now based on what's going on?" Right? Don't interpret it for them and say, "It looks like you're mad at me." Just say, "I noticed that you were crossing your arms. Is there something that I said that caused you to do that?" That's another way to address it. Now let's talk about setting boundaries because sometimes, no matter how well you listen, the conversation can become too heated or unproductive. So here's how you can set boundaries in a respectful way. So start by clearly communicating your limits. So say, "I really want to understand where you're coming from, but I would really like us to avoid personal attacks, raising our voices, or name calling. Do you agree with that?" So you can set these ground rules before the conversation starts. You can also decide when to disengage. Sometimes the best way to preserve a relationship is also to know when to stop the conversation. So when things are getting too heated, you might say, I think we're getting too emotional right now, so maybe let's come back to this conversation tomorrow. I think the most important thing is that you always make a plan to come back to the conversation instead of stonewalling the person or just refusing to talk about it completely. Also, you need to respect the other person's boundaries too. So ask them what their limits are and see if you can agree to those terms before a difficult conversation. Finally, you may set certain ground rules about certain events or situations where you're just not going to have these types of conversations. So, for example, we're not going to talk about politics at the dinner table today. Or we're going to have this Christmas gathering. There's going to be a lot of different people who are here with different views. So let's steer clear of the political talk for just so that we can all try to enjoy ourselves and for things to not get too heated. It's completely and perfectly okay to do that, especially if you're the host of the event. I think that that's really important. When you're the host, you may feel also more responsible that your guests are comfortable and having a good time. So it's perfectly fine for you to set those limits and communicate them in advance to your guests. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Mental Health Bites. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, there's plenty more where that came from. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you have. Also, feel free to share this video with your friends and family who might find it useful. Stay tuned for more awesome content, and as always, thank you for your support.